But I want to give you my background and some information that you can use, hopefully, to affect local government decisions. My presentation is guided under the premise, as naive as it may or may not be, that understanding the mistakes and the successes of the past will inform better decisions into the future. I will admit right up front that at times, maybe most of the time, this is going to sound somewhat pessimistic. It's not intended to be. It's neither optimistic or pessimistic. It's a realistic approach about what happened. I have had not only a front row seat, but a participatory seat in the Sarasota County planning process now for about 46 years. And it's also not meant to necessarily criticize or indict local elected officials that are in office now, or the staff that are in office now, because indeed what I'm going to talk about has taken many decades and many generations of elected officials, many generations of staff, in order for these conclusions that I'm going to suggest as factual to be true. All right. So I want you to imagine Sarasota County in 1900. My family came here. The joke is my family came to Sarasota in 89. And of course people think how can you have 5 generations and be here since, it's 1889. So this photograph was taken of my family in 1913. The little girl there kind of looking off and frustrated in the side, that's my grandmother. That's Margaret Lewis. And then of course my grandfather and great grandfather are there in the center. Sarasota, including 5 Points, looked much different back in the day. But then again, so did the rest of the county. 2/3 of Sarasota County was covered in either pine flatwoods or prairies. These represent the majority of the landscape. I'm sorry, I can't get it to advance slide by slide because it's a PDF. Represent the majority of Sarasota County. 2/3 of it, indeed. These were canopy-less areas that had all of the rainfall that would fall on them would very slowly move across the land downstream, permeating into the soil, much like the Everglades does in South Florida today. This was the first step in the natural water quality treatment in Sarasota County prior to development. It was home to one of my favorite game species, the bobwhite quail, as well as many other migratory birds and endangered plants and animals. The scrub in Sarasota County was always rare. There was never a great deal of it, but it played a critical biological role. These quartz-like sands were responsible for the recharge of surficial aquifers. They were home to globally imperiled species, such as the Peromyscus, the Florida mouse that you see here, as well as home to many creatures that found their way into the Florida landscape during the Pleistocene Ice Age, when the Gulf of Mexico was much drier, and then, of course, when the Ice Age of the Pleistocene era ceased and the Gulf filled back up, all of these desert and chaparral species were stuck in the subtropics of Florida to evolve into separate and distinct species of very interesting nature. Sarasota County was dotted with these ephemeral wetland systems looking much like Swiss cheese. They were also critical habitat and the next step in the water quality and the nutrient cycle that kept the Sarasota County water systems healthy. They were called isolated, but they did provide for a multitude of hydro periods, some of them staying wet 365 days of the year, and others of these wetland systems that were only wet every 3 or 4 years. And this cycle provided excellent habitat for this imperiled species, the Florida gopher frog, that requires wetlands that are dry most of the time and only wet a couple times every other year for it to lay its eggs and its tadpoles. If it lays its eggs and tadpoles in a constantly wet wetland, the predatory fish will eat the young and the species will cease to survive. Next in line was the grassy sloughs of Sarasota County. This is the downstream transport system of this water quality utility, again slowly conveying and filtering the water as it left the flatwoods. All of these natural systems that I've talked about so far were completely and entirely dependent upon natural fire. It was essential to maintain the archetype of the habitat and to provide the necessary ingredients of the habitat for the threatened and endangered and native species. If the fires would kill the hardwoods and keep the pines healthy. As a matter of fact, after tens of thousands of years of the state of Florida burning, the plants and the animals not only adapted to fire, they actually became completely dependent upon fire, and the absence of fire would create the demise of those species. But fire also played a very important role in the nutrient cycle, recycling nutrients. And if you look on the back side of this fire, you will notice everything has been blackened. That blackened is charcoal. Charcoal is one of the most amazing water filters known to man. So here we have Sarasota County, 2/3 of it being burned to the ground every 3 to 5 years, producing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of acres of charcoal landscapes, filtering the water as it went downstream. Next in line were the hardwood hammocks. Hardwood hammocks were actually pretty rare in Sarasota County when natural fire had its way, but they had these very rich organic soils that provided for, again, water filtration as well as carbon sequestration. They were also the hangout during the daytime for many of our threatened and endangered species, such as the Florida panther and the black bear, and they also provided continuity and connectivity to the other habitats for essential wildlife dispersal. Moving further downstream, we had our rivers, lakes, and streams. This was the part of Sarasota that probably most of the stories were told about. You've heard about the Myakka River. I can tell you that my family's stories were almost exclusively based around these rivers and creeks. In the early 1900s in Sarasota County, virtually everyone in the county could name almost every creek and tell you the wildlife that abound within the individual creeks. The estuaries, considered one of the most biologically rich places on the planet Earth, were also a place where the freshwater meets the saltwater, where the mangroves thrived. Again, purifying the water and providing fisheries habitats. In the early days, these fishery habitats were absolutely a critical economic driver in Sarasota County. This is a photograph taken of Blackburn Point Road. That's Casey Key to the left, the Sarasota mainland off to the right. And just look at that bend full of these huge, oversized snook. This is the fish house that I grew up in Osprey. This is the Taylor fish camp. And I can tell you that these old salty dogs that would run these mullet skiffs out of Vamo and Osprey, when the red tide started to get bad in the 1980s, these old men, I can't repeat exactly how they phrased it because it would be far too vulgar for this audience, but they blamed at that time the development of the piney woods for the increases in red tides. And of course the beaches and the passes, this is Point of Rocks, in Sarasota County were wild, they were untamed, they were free to erode, accrete, and migrate freely. So that was the Sarasota County of the 1900s, the Sarasota County that my great-grandfather and his son enjoyed. But soon after they came to Sarasota at the turn of the century, by 1921, Sarasota's population had skyrocketed to 5,000 residents. By 1950, as this chart shows, there were 28,000 people in our beloved county. Most of them, as you see, confined to the city of Sarasota, Inglewood, and Venice. But by 1970, the Mackle brothers' infamous Northport boondoggle was moving right along. You see development there. Again, as you learn, a lot of it clustered around Warm Mineral Springs. But you can see still most of the development is focused in the Inglewood, Venice, Ospey, Laurel, Nokomis, and the Sarasota areas. By 1990, the assault on the eastern ranch lands has begun and continues in full force. But you're also seeing now a connectivity of these municipal and township areas along the coast of Sarasota County. By 2020, the uninterrupted sprawl has consumed the entire coast of Sarasota County and now has a three-front assault on Sarasota County's rural character. First, coming from the unincorporated Sarasota County expanding to the east. Secondly, the city of the city of Venice annexing lands and moving into the north. And thirdly, the huge annexations of ranch lands in Northport. All of these annexations were solely driven by development interests. Now, one would think that a plan such as, or growth such as this would be without a plan. One would be wrong. Beginning in 1972, recognizing the serious threat to Florida's quality of life, natural environment, and economy, state leaders approved Saving Paradise, the Florida Environmental Land and Water Management Act, followed in 1975 by the Local Government Comprehensive Planning Act that mandated every county in Florida adopt a local comprehensive plan and that all development and permits be consistent with this plan. Sarasota County's first effort looked like this. This was in 1975. You notice that the rural and agricultural lands still separated the three cities, the three major cities of, I include Ospey, Laurel, and Nokomis with Venice. With Venice, Sarasota, and Northport, the presence of the agricultural lands are still pretty obvious there. The much heralded and famous 1981 plan with the concentric circles, although it did show the first breaching of I-75 with a semi-rural designation just east of the city of Sarasota, most of the rural areas were still protected, and you could still see rural areas designated in the comprehensive plan to the west side and much to the south of Interstate 75. The 1989 plan completely and entirely fills in the coastal areas of Sarasota County with an urban growth designation. This plan contained an urban containment policy that mandated I-75 as the ultimate eastern boundary for urban growth in Sarasota County ever. It was a commitment made to the community and to the cities that urban growth would never reach I-75. 1999, the ultimate urban development containment policy is obliterated, it's trashed, and the threat of urbanizing Sarasota County's rural and agricultural lands now becomes imminent. The 2023 plan, at first glance, may look similar to the 1999 plan, but there's an exception. First off, there are additional semi-rural areas added to the plan. You can also see large areas annexed by Venice. But the rural lands that you see depicted in this darker green in this area are now impacted by another force. That force is the Sarasota County 2050 plan. This plan was heralded as the grand bargain among rural preservationists, environmentalists, developers, and landowners. 2050 was to be, I quote, a master plan that would accommodate population growth while breaking with Florida's history of indiscriminately carving up the countryside. 2050 allowed new development in eastern rural Sarasota County, provided it clustered development into compact, new urbanist-styled, walkable, self-sufficient communities called villages and hamlets, in exchange for leaving other lands permanently undeveloped and preserved. In fact, in 2003, the Congress for New Urbanism awarded Sarasota 2050 one of its highest awards. Now, to further ensure the preservation of Sarasota County, a group of citizens, including our own Bill Zoller in the back, worked on amending Sarasota County's Sarasota County's charter. This is very similar to a constitution for local governments. And they had to go to the voters to get these amendments approved, and in fact, they were successful. And you can see the numerous requirements for unanimous board approval and things like that. There's a provision in there that this new growth must be fiscally neutral. But one of the things that was done at that time that I supported was that many of these charter provisions did not apply to 2050. Why? Well, 2050 already had all these protective covenants there. It already had the fiscal neutrality, the compact development, the wildlife corridors. It was all contained in 2050. So at the time, we believed it was not necessary to be repetitive in the Sarasota County Charter. But as we were soon to find out, these so-called rural areas in that 2023 plan that I just showed you are actually only conditionally rural. Since its 2002 adoption, most of the 2050 commitments to protect the character of rural areas have slowly been eroded away, and the interdependent relationship between 2050 and the Sarasota County Charter has been lost. In fact, most of these covenants and promises made in the Sarasota County Comprehensive Plan can best be described as broken promises. These commitments to compact, walkable, non-gated, new urbanist communities with multiple integrated housing types, including affordable housing, are now gone. They've been replaced with the same old definition of suburban sprawl. The requirement for internal village activity centers have been replaced with commercial centers at intersections very similar to what you see all over Sarasota County. The enhanced environmental protection standards, including wider greenways, wildlife corridors, setbacks, have all been compromised or functionally eliminated. The intensity transects created by requiring lower density hamlets have also been compromised to effectively being non-existent. And one that really burns me is the fiscal neutrality responsibilities for developers to cover the costs of infrastructure such as roads and fire stations, as you clearly see illustrated in this 2055 slide, as you clearly see enumerated in the county charter, are now being subsidized with $96.3 million of your infrastructure surtax to build fire stations in roads in what are now or recently cow pastures, subsidizing the profits and obliterating any claim to fiscal neutrality for development in eastern Sarasota County. It's coming out of your pockets, your parks, your libraries, your sidewalks to schools. All of these programs are being compromised by this $96.3 million that's been appropriated to develop this infrastructure in eastern Sarasota County to fuel this growth. I now characterize 2050 as a Trojan horse, because the only commitment that was made to the community in the 2050 plan is in fact the commitment of higher densities and intensities for developers. It could be said, and it has been said, that economic, social, and market conditions have changed since 2050. I'm not going to argue that. But 2050 was a voluntary overlay district. It was never intended to vest property rights. If the conditions have changed and the 2050 plan is no longer economically viable, fine, remove it. And let's just go back to the 5 and 10 acre OUE ranchette zonings that was there before this plan was adopted. 2050 was the worst decision that I made as a county commissioner. So now let's go back and review the outcomes of this comprehensive planning exercise. And let's start again with 5 points. Why not? That's where this began. This is 5 points today. Much different than my great uncle Mizell knew it in his time. And so too does the rest of the county look much different. The Pine Flatwoods have largely been converted to suburban housing development where habitat values and water quality functions have been compromised or entirely lost. Our herbaceous wetlands have been replaced by stormwater ponds or destroyed completely, and with development codes that devalue drier wetlands, the value and function of many of the existing wetlands has been lost or devalued. The grassy sloughs that once were all over Sarasota County, the sloughs, tidal creeks, and rivers, have been converted to ditches and canals to optimize drainage and development potential. This is Philippi Creek, a branch of Philippi Creek that you're looking at here. Our hardwood hammocks, despite the presumption of being preserved in our codes, have also been lost. I'm going to show you 3 series of slides here. These are very recent. These are within the last 2 years. This was a hardwood hammock. One of the land use changes, the battles that I lost. Again, an actual photograph taken about 2 years ago. I'm standing in the same place just a few weeks later, and I finally figured out how to do it. I took this photograph. Again, notice those amazingly rich black organic soils that have taken hundreds of years to develop, that are absolutely essential in water quality and sequestering carbon. The third photograph, taken from the same perspective, now looks like this. All of the ecological value totally gone. Our estuarine mangroves have been butchered, and much of the intertidal habitat has been changed to hardened seawalls forever in the future, preventing the migration of our shoreline to accommodate for sea level rise and fall. The habitat is now permanently locked. It's permanently gone. Our manatees have been threatened with the loss of seagrasses, completely attributable to excess anthropogenic nitrogen that are a result of converting these land uses. And who can ignore the fact that our beaches are now littered with this red tide that is more intense, longer lasting, and covering much greater extent of the Gulf than we've ever seen before, creating serious economic and health threats to humans and wildlife alike. Our scrub habitats in Sarasota County, 93% of the scrub habitats in Sarasota County are now gone. The only habitat that the Florida scrub jay can survive in. 2 slides to show you an example of this. This is the corner of Laurel Road. I'm standing on the US 41 right-of-way. You can clearly see they're threatened and endangered species there. These are actually live Florida scrub jays that I had been monitoring for over 10 years. And you can see it's designated as a commercial site. The environmental consultant that went to this site couldn't find the Florida scrub jays and said that if they were there, they were probably just incidental and that there was no reason to preserve this scrub. And this, of course, is what the site looks like today. Unfortunately, the loss of these habitats is not a result of simply development, but bad development that has resulted from bad planning. I want to dispel one myth that I hear all the time when I speak to groups, and they say, when scrub or other wildlife habitat is destroyed, where does the wildlife go? Folks, the wildlife doesn't go anywhere. It dies. Their populations are dependent on the number of acres that we preserve. So as we destroy the landscapes, the wildlife is destroyed along with it. I like to kid, but it's no kidding matter, that if we wanted to design a community that would have the greatest negative impacts on our water and land ecosystems, we would be pretty hard pressed to design a more catastrophic system than what we have today. So there's a lot of other additional consequences that I could spend individually the entire evening going through. I'm just going to really quick go through them, and then I'm going to wrap up. The first one, some of you have already talked about today, and that has to do with transportation, as we like to call it, or traffic. We have this coordinated land use plan has resulted in an automobile-dependent, pedestrian, bicycle, and transit-hostile, traffic-congested roads with increased pollution and decreased economic productivity. If you think traffic is bad today, hold on. The last 200,000 people that came to Sarasota, their traffic needs were accommodated by widening the major arterial collectors and connectors of Sarasota County. They are now maxed out. And we have another 400,000 to 500,000 people already planned to come to Sarasota. So the option that we had over the last 15 years is no longer available to us. It reminds me of this analogy that goes something like curing traffic congestion by widening roads is like trying to cure obesity by loosening your belt. Sooner or later, you're going to run out of space, and that's exactly what we've done. The traffic that you see during the season today will be the traffic of the summer in 7 years, and the traffic in the season will be just like you see in Fort Lauderdale, St. Petersburg, or Miami. Affordable housing. A recent article. This one you can see that the county commission had just relieved any of those commitments, those promises that were made to the community to guarantee affordable housing for these projects east of I-75. And again, you can see the only person that stood up against this move was the late great Commissioner and former State Senator Nancy Dietert, a good friend of mine. Affordable housing is a byproduct of this bad planning. We have never accommodated in the last 40 years affordable housing in our growth and land use plans in effective ways. We have policies there, but I did an analysis of the 27 policies in the comprehensive plan for affordable housing. I actually had county staff doing it, and not a single affordable housing unit was created or maintained as a result of the comprehensive plan, except for those units that were created using federally subsidized monies. Much has been said about the loss of our rural and our agricultural heritage. This is the Sarasota I grew up in. This is the Sarasota that many of us love. My good friend here, Buster Barrymore T. Longino, would be turning over in his grave to see what is happening to the rural ranch lands that he loved so much in Sarasota County, and lands that he tried to preserve as a county commissioner. This is again another declaration of water shortage. This is not a 10 to 3-year-old article. This article is 3 months ago, where we came dangerously close of not having enough water to meet our needs. There seems to be one day every 2 years that people seem to forget all of these critical local issues. Anyone want to guess what that day is? It's election day. It's election day. So many people come up to me and say, what are we going to do about traffic? What are we going to do about agriculture? What are we going to do about War Mineral Springs? And I'll ask them who you voted for. And inevitably I will look at them and I will say, well, the person that you voted for just supported doing everything that you are opposed to having done to your community. We are simply not paying attention and holding elected officials accountable. I want to leave on a positive note, though. I told you it was going to be mostly pessimistic, but the vast majority of the things that I said are not editorial comments. They are statement of facts. Over the last few decades, ever since the creation of, in 1930, the Mayaca River State Park, generations and generations of Sarasota County citizens have been pushing back. Most recently, with numerous referenda creating the Environmentally Sensitive Lands Program. Here you see a list of those referendum. 35% of Sarasota County, as a result of these efforts, is now preserved. This is what it looks like if you were fortunate enough to be orbiting the planet in the International Space Station, and you were to look out the starboard window down at Sarasota. This is the image that you will see. A green space of 130,000 acres, so large that indeed now you can see it from Sarasota County. So, in conclusion, where do we go from here? I took that multicolored comprehensive plan map that you saw recently, the 2023 version that has something like 15 different colors on it, and I simplified it into 3 colors. I originally asked for Sarasota County staff to help me prepare this document, because as many times as I have asked people to produce it, no one could ever show me where it was or where it had been done. So I thought it was important for the community to see it. So with the help of a good friend of mine, Kevin Cooper, He helped me prepare this map based upon the best data that we have. So the three colors here, the brown areas, the tan areas, are those areas that for all intent and purposes, the decisions for planning has already been made. And it does include the old Mayaca area and the municipalities and the areas that connect them. The purple area, or I think somebody told me that's magenta, it's purple to me, are those areas that are kind of in flux. So the tan area represents about 435,000 residential units. And the magenta area represents another 40,000 residential units that's kind of up in the air. Much of that is 2050. And the green space is our public lands. So developers always ask me, if we have a third of Sarasota County already preserved, when is enough enough? I like to use this graphic and turn that on them and saying, well, 2/3 of the county is going to be dedicated to development. You tell me when is enough is enough. And frankly, why don't we just ask the community what they would rather have? Would you rather have more of this green space, or would you rather have more of the developed area? I believe that if the growth moratorium of Dan Lobeck and Jim Ford were proposed to voters today, it would be unstoppable, because the pushback is like nothing I've ever seen in my 45 years of doing this work. I then took this one step further, and I took all of the already planned land that you saw in the magenta and the tan and the green, because the green is already planned. And this is basically what we have left to plan in Sarasota County. And it represents approximately 10% of Sarasota County's total land area, or about 34,000 acres. Folks, that is what's left. And amazingly, our planning folks did not feel this was important enough to work on. So I would suggest that this last 10% is going to be gone in our lifetime. So just as for 12,000 years, the residents of Sarasota County have had a conscious decision about what they're going to save or what they're going to be developed, just like Warm Mineral Springs. The people in this room are the last generation of Sarasotans to have that opportunity, because by the time we are gone, that 10,000 acres will be decided. It will either be preserved or it will be lost for future generations. So I would encourage you, we are going to be coming back to the citizens of Sarasota with a renewal of the Environmentally Sensitive Lands Program in 2026. It will include the possibility of purchasing these last precious remaining undeveloped lands in Sarasota County, and I would encourage you to support it so that we can save what's left. And thank you for your attention. So